Good morning, students, and welcome to the very first lecture in Sociology of Work. I hope you're all doing well. I hope you're excited and energized to start a new semester. I know I am. I love what I do. I like to teach. I care about this material. And I hope you also make an effort to engage in the intellectual enterprise, which is higher education. All right, so Sociology of Work. This is the introductory lecture. And let me just point to this beautiful mural. You may be familiar with the artist. I believe he's a Mexican artist, Diego Rivera. And he created these wonderful murals which captured the various kinds of human activities that people were engaged in. And because this is a sociology of work, we want to capture this sense of the exertion of human labor within an organizational setting, within a factory, division of labor. Looks like some kind of assembly line. There's a lot we could say just about this one mural in terms of its analysis of work, how it's organized. And throughout the semester, we will be discussing all of the implications that arise from understanding human labor and how it is organized, particularly in American society, capitalist society. So I love his work. In fact, let me show you. Okay, let's see if this works. Okay. See that? All right. That's on my wall. That's actually a segment of the larger mural that will be kind of the icon for the class. So all of the lectures and the PowerPoints will be posted early in the week. This is Monday. I'm going to try to get this stuff done Monday because I got other classes, I got other projects, I got a lot to do. But I'm looking forward to this class. So that's Diego Rivera. Look him up. Check out some of his other beautiful murals, some of which are in some of the most renowned museums in the world. All right, let's get started. So I have there we go. Okay. About the class, please take a look at the recorded video introduction. It's been posted for a while in Canvas. Hopefully some of you have already checked it out. Those of you who are on the ball, engaged, connected, those are the students that are going to do well. Those of you who are not engaged, not committed, haven't checked in, not going to work out. Okay? Just telling you that now. All right? Read the syllabus. View that video if you haven't. Discusses the various activities in the course. Reading Smart. Let me just say something about Reading Smart because there's a significant amount of reading in this class every week. In this first week, you're going to be reading something that comes from a fairly conventional sociology of work textbook, a couple chapters. And in fact, my lecture will overlap significantly with the material in the reading for this week. That will not be the case generally, although there will always be some relationship, obviously, between what I'm lecturing on and what you're reading, but probably not as directly as will be the case this week. Reading Smart, what does that mean? It means that, and in the reading writing assignment, this is where it's going to be reflected, how smart you read, is to extract and pull out the important key concepts, ideas, theories, arguments, positions, theses, whatever you want to call them. Okay? When you're reading articles, you all know this as students, there's a lot of stuff. It's dense. It's not all as important as, it's not all equally important, right? There are some aspects of the reading that are more vital than others. A good, smart reader is able to identify those and extract them and mention them in a concise way in the reading and writing assignment. Maybe you haven't had practice doing that. That's something, a skill you will develop in this class. Autodidactism, one of my favorite terms. What does it mean? Auto, self, didact, learn. If you want to understand and expand your knowledge about any aspect of the sociology of work or labor or anything in any other field you're interested in, you can develop the knowledge and the expertise by spending the time and the energy locating the resources that will educate you. And I am hoping that every student has several areas, and this overlaps with the next point about intellectual curiosity. You're intellectually curious about something. You want to know more about it. You want to understand it better. You want to be able to talk about it intelligently. That requires you to educate yourself beyond any class or any assigned required reading. Now, the last point here is that sociology is a very political discipline. And for those of you who have taken some of my other classes, I point this out. I take a political approach. I have a perspective. It's going to come through in the class. It comes from a sort of critical left orientation. But I also believe that sociology is, as a discipline, if you incorporate the sociological perspective, is inherently political. And I have a quote that I will show you in a few slides that I think illustrates how the questions we ask as sociologists automatically have important political implications. All right, now one thing I asked you to do, I think in the video introduction, ask you to do it again. And there's a place in the assignments area where you can post the response to these two questions. Kind of jobs you've had, and what are your career aspirations? When I know this, I know something about the students, I know what kind of experiences you've had, and as I'm talking and putting together these lectures, sometimes I can make reference to some of the information you provide. And of course, as I've said many times, check in. I'm on campus. If you're on campus as well, if you're taking campus classes, I have office hours. Stop in, introduce yourself, or check in Zoom, and we can have a conversation, and I learn something even more about you, your experiences in the world of work, and your aspirations, and your background. All of that I find interesting. All right, so political critical discipline. So this is one of my favorite quotes. What a critical social theory, and when we say critical social theory, we're really talking about the way in which sociologists theorize about the organization of society. What a critical social theory really needs to address is why hunger, poverty, and other forms of human suffering persist despite the technological and scientific, and I would add financial, potential to mitigate them or to eliminate them altogether. Why do people have to work so hard? Why do people have to go to work every day to survive? Why do people struggle to make ends meet? We could ask all of these questions. And when you start asking those questions, it forces you to think more broadly about, well, what is it about the way the society is organized that results in a situation where people are struggling economically, are hungry, are living in poverty, are suffering generally, when we have the capacity to do something about it? That obviously forces us to start thinking about the political economic organization of society. And that's a big aspect of this course, understanding work within that context. All right, now if you read the first readings for this first week, there's a couple chapters, and they talk about the primacy of production thesis. Now, if you think about the idea of primacy, it sort of means like, what do people consider to be the first, the most significant, the most important factor in shaping other social phenomenon, primacy. Okay? We sometimes call this the primacy principle. Right? And in sociology generally, and as I say, this has its roots in Marxist analysis. Certainly, people employ this model. It's not confined to Marxists. It's actually widely subscribed to among many sociologists. And that is that the act of work, okay, production, which is the general term we're talking about here, what happens in the workplace, in the use and sale of labor power, shapes many other aspects of society. Okay? So we can talk about individual consequences, right, of the kind of work you do, the kind of workplace you're in, the working conditions under which you labor. Right? And so, in one sense, people develop a sense of identity, sense of who they are. Sociology class, we talk about the master status. Right? What that means is, if somebody says, how do you define yourself? Often people will define themselves by the work that they do. That is a form of identity. And it shapes their feelings about themselves. As I say, dignity, their mental and physical health. More broadly, the kind of work you do in a capitalist society obviously shapes your life chances, a term we use in sociology, life chances, prospects for economic success and security, and, importantly, in the Marxian sense, your class position. Your social class position in society is shaped by the kind of work you do and your position within the capitalist organization of production. Talk much more about that. So, how people define their worth, their value, is often based on the kind of work they do and how much they're paid, how much authority they have, how much respect they get. Again, the individual level consequences here. Within a broader context, I would connect this to what we call the sociology of knowledge. This is a term that was most closely associated with the theorist Karl Mannheim. And Mannheim basically said that how we understand the world, how we make sense of the world, our perspective on the world, is shaped by our social position. And within the primacy of production, that social position is the kind of work you do, your occupation, the job, the experiences you have in the workplace. So this is a kind of very, as I say, Marxian approach, because some people have said Marx is a economic determinist. What does that mean, to be an economic determinist? It means that in the Marxist model, what happens, the way work is organized, the economic system in which you live, very much shapes all other aspects of society. Here's another way to look at it more broadly. Here we were looking at the individual consequences. Here we're looking at it much more broadly. Okay? So we talk about the organization of production. Labor can be organized in lots of different ways. How it's organized is often determined by the political economic system under which people work. We'll call that system capitalism in the United States. So, on the left-hand side, we have aspects of the production system, the organization of production. Who owns the means of production, to use the term that Marx uses? The means of production, the corporations, the factories, the machines, the capital. Who owns that? And how does the ownership of that shape the labor conditions of workers? And this is a very materialist approach. Okay? If you know something about Marxist theory, he was a materialist. Okay? The act of producing tangible goods and commodities, the actual production process, shapes other aspects of society, politics, ideology. Okay? So, if you take a social theory course, there's a debate between materialists and idealists. Okay? Is it ideas that people have that then translate into the way the system works? Or is it the material production that takes place in a society and the way it's organized and who owns and controls the means of production and who don't that ultimately shapes what people think? Okay? Ideas as a consequence of material production, or material production as a consequence of ideas? Now, we don't have to take a dogmatic approach to this question, because obviously there is some interaction between organizing society in a particular way and the ideas that people have which support and legitimize and justify that system. Okay? That's called ideology. We're going to be talking about all of these different aspects. So, in the primacy of production thesis, as it's laid out here, I try to do it graphically. The organization of production obviously determines the socioeconomic development of society. How goods are produced, how the production is organized, obviously impacts economic growth, economic expansion. It determines the class structure, and here we get into Marx. We'll be talking much more about the class structure aspect. Okay. Demographic changes, political changes, the role of education, the role of developing people's skills, demanded by the production system, all of these things. Okay. So I'm spending a lot of time talking in various ways about the idea that how production is organized in a society. Our society is a capitalist society. Shapes many other features. Is a window into understanding other aspects of human existence, human life, human struggle. Okay. More broadly, sociology of work, core principles. Okay. Individual workers are embedded, this is a term that's widely used in sociology, embedded in organizational structures, social relationships, managers and workers, owners and managers. Okay. So to understand the experience of an individual worker, one must understand the context in which they work, the conditions, the organizational structure, the social relations, which are social class relations. We don't assume that there are any essential human needs. Okay? What people need, what they think they need, what drives them, what motivates them, these are often a product of, we might say, the social construction, social, cultural, organizational forces. Okay? Say more about the human needs issue. Technology. Enormous amount written about the role of technology in work. It's a huge area of exploration and writing and inquiry, scholarly research. But here's the point. There is no necessary fundamental consequence of the introduction of technology. Technology can liberate. Technology can enslave. It depends on who controls it and in whose interest it is employed. Okay? Because sometimes we have a technological determinist approach. Well, over time, as technology develops, it will inevitably produce. No. And again, we're going to discuss this because there was a time, when we were seeing the dot-com revolution, the internet, information technology. This was in the 90s. I was living through this. And there were all of these wonderful visions that people had of how this technology was going to liberate and free people from drudgery and insecurity. Well, it depends who controls that technology. Technology can be used for, obviously, other purposes. And we will examine that. And some of you probably have a sense of the extent to which technology is now actually being used less to liberate than to control and subjugate and monitor and surveil workers. There's an assumption that the particular way that work is organized in this factory, in this place, in this time, in the capitalist system, is the most efficient way to organize production. Otherwise, we wouldn't be using it. Or the idea that somehow, over time, we evolve naturally toward more and more efficient forms of production. Anytime somebody says this is the most efficient way to do something, you need to ask, efficient for who? Who decides what is efficient? How is efficiency measured? Does everyone benefit equally from the drive toward more efficient systems of production? Or do some benefit disproportionately? The expense, perhaps, of others. So, always within sociology, unlike probably a course you would take maybe in the business school on management techniques, they would say, this is a win-win. Workers win, managers win, we all have the same interests, we're all in this together. Sociologists largely reject that notion. Some people command, some people obey. Some people have power in an organization, some people have almost none. And people, based on their location in the production system, have different interests, and not all interests are being served. I throw in organizational legitimacy here. There are different ways organizations try to signal that they're progressive, that they care. We'll talk about some of these techniques that organizations use to try to signal symbolically. Recently, we have the organizations that seem to be on board of the sort of anti-racist movement. And they advertise that. We call this woke washing. They want people to think that they are behind social justice, while at the same time, they're preventing their workers from organizing. Doing everything they can to fight against union organization. Perhaps producing products in other countries, paying the lowest possible wage. So organizational legitimacy. How organizations that people work in try to communicate symbolically that they're good organizations, that they care about society, justice, symbolically, but not substantively. Substantively means, what are they actually doing within the organization to advance that goal for the workers in a material, not a symbolic way. Formal organization versus informal organization. Discussed this as well throughout the semester. Formal organization is largely the formal, written, rules and requirements within any organization, job descriptions, organizational chart, that kind of stuff. If you've ever been hired for a job, sometimes they introduce you to the organization. They provide this sort of thing. Right? But there's an informal side. The informal side isn't written. It isn't codified. But a lot of what goes on in an organization is emergent. It's informal. It's interactions between people, talking to one another, helping each other out. It's not part of the organizational chart. It often deviates radically from the organizational chart. But organizations would probably not be able to function if it wasn't for an informal level of activity among workers, relations between workers and managers, not formally stated in any employee handbook, in any job description, or outlined in any organizational chart. I do like the mention of the hierarchy of credibility in the reading. This comes from Howard Becker, great sociologist, made many valuable contributions to sociology. And this is particularly important within organizations because all organizations, for the most part, work organizations, are hierarchical. They're bureaucratic. Okay? And the question is, why do some people have more value, more credibility than others? And who is a credible spokesperson for understanding an organization? So what we know is that most of the time when you want to get information about an organization, particularly among the mainstream media, they go to the people at the top. Those are the people that have the credentials. They have the power. They have the authority. They're decision makers. And presumably they are the credible sources from which to understand what's happening. Okay. So we know that there is a hierarchy of credibility. And presumably people at the bottom, the workers, okay, have less credibility, less value. Now, sociologists are always tuned into this. So while, maybe over in the management school in the College of Business, they want to talk to the CEOs. They're the ones who presumably can tell us what's happening, how the system works. Sociologists take a very different view. They want to talk to the people who are actually engaged in the labor. Okay. All right. Sociological levels of analysis. It's important because there's different ways we can think about understanding work, right? And we often think of the three levels of analysis: macro, meso, micro. Macro is a larger organization of a whole society. So I say societal or national level. How that changes. Let me shut that off. Social change. How that affects work. We're going to talk quite a bit about the concept of neoliberal capitalism. Neoliberal capitalism is a macro level term. It's the way in which, in our society, capitalism today is organized. Neoliberalism. Those of you who have taken other classes with me know I spend a lot of time talking about neoliberalism. Some people say, Jaffe, if I hear you say neoliberalism one more time, I'm going to shoot myself. I say, look, if you want to understand almost everything about the current arrangement of social relations and life in the United States today, you need to understand the political economic organization of capitalism, which is neoliberal capitalism. Okay, so we can think of changes in the organization of work based on this macro level. The meso level is looking more at we'll say the intermediate between the macro and the micro. Organizational, institutional dynamics. Okay. Focusing, let's say, on the workplace. All right. How is the workplace organized? How is it structured? Is it bureaucratic? How bureaucratically structured is it? Do workers have any rights? So these are levels of analysis. And it's important to link these, as I'll point out. And then you have the micro level. This is what's happening to individuals, or individuals in relationship to other individuals, interpersonal interactions in the workplace, the way individuals feel about their work. This concept of emotional labor, something I talk about in the intro class. The demands that are made on somebody in the service sector who has to project a certain level of kindness toward clients or toward customers, which is an emotional act required of them. This is a very micro level, or what we sometimes call symbolic interaction. People engage in symbolic interaction. You work in the service sector. The expectation is that when customers come in, you treat them well, you greet them, you smile. That's a demand of the job. It's a form of symbolic interaction. What Hochschild described as emotional labor. Many of you probably have worked in the service sector, maybe as servers. You understand what we mean by emotional labor. So that's the micro level dynamics. But we need to think about the relationship between these different levels of analysis. So that's what I try to do here. So, for example, the larger macro political economic system is neoliberal capitalism. Under neoliberal capitalism, as you will learn in this class, we have had a corporate restructuring process which has impacted the organization of work throughout the society. So, reorganization of the employment relationship at the level of the organization. And what's the implication of this for individuals? You will see, you will learn that this reorganization of production under neoliberalism has increased the level of economic insecurity. It has given rise to a term. You'll learn more about this as well. Okay, so this is all just teasers for what's coming later in the semester. Precarious work. Precarity. Term didn't exist 20 years ago. Why does it exist now, the term precarious work? Because it's an experience that people have under the neoliberal reorganization of production. And when you're suffering economically, you're insecure, work is precarious, low pay, few benefits, maybe bouts of unemployment. You may suffer from depression. So this affects your mental health. Again, going back, the primacy of production, the experiences you have at work, and your mental and physical, these two things are closely connected, are impacted. And we have deaths of despair, another concept. Okay? Neoliberalism, capitalism, that's a concept. Deaths of despair, that's a concept. Hierarchy of credibility, that's a concept. The reason, someone said, Jaffe, why do you keep saying these are concepts? Because in the reading and writing assignment, I ask you to identify concepts. So you need to know what a concept is. Okay. Deaths of despair. We'll talk more about that. All right. Now, notice this is top down, right? You've got the macroeconomic system. The macro level political economic system of neoliberal capitalism and its impact downward on the organization of production and further downward to the micro level on the experience of individual workers. And in sociology, we often think about structures and change at the structural level shaping the rest of human experience through institutions and organizations at the meso level. What about bottom up? Let's think about bottom up. This is important as well, certainly in the Marxian sense. Well, workers realize they're getting screwed. They're not getting paid enough. They have no control over their schedule. Work is more precarious, insecure. They're struggling day after day. They talk to each other. They communicate with other workers. And they begin to realize they're getting screwed. Now, in the Marxian sense, this is kind of a level of class consciousness. They begin to develop the idea that they have interests as workers that are different than the interests of the managers and the owners. And so, they begin to communicate. What can we do about this problem? And in many cases, and we'll talk a lot about this because it's happening now in the United States in a way that it hasn't happened in a long time, workers are getting together and organizing into unions. Starbucks, Trader Joe's, I just posted something, an example of a media post. Okay. That requires organizational action, right? So micro level interactions with workers, class consciousness, forming a union, and ultimately that union shaping the larger political landscape. This has been borne out in history. Labor organizations are a powerful, powerful source for progressive political economic reform of the economic system. All right? So, my point here is for you to, as good social scientists, good analytical thinkers, levels of analysis, macro, meso, micro, we can understand work at all of these different levels, but ideally, how do we connect them? What is the relationship between them? All right. Okay. Now, not all of you are sociology majors. Many of you are. Sociology, we have the big three. Classical social theorists, Marx, Weber, Durkheim. I discussed this in my intro class very briefly. But if you take a theory course, which is required in sociology, you get a much better sense of what these theorists were arguing. Let's see if I can move my screen so you can see everything. Okay. All right. So I'm just introducing some of the concepts that come from these three major theorists, which will inform our understanding of the world of work. The point being that what they wrote at the height of the Industrial Revolution, they were living through, okay, the transition from feudalism to capitalism, agricultural to industrial, traditional to modern, rural to urban. It's massive, massive. The Great Transformation, as Karl Polanyi called it. They developed a set of concepts, and all these concepts inform our understanding of work. Marx, to me, is the most important, but not to the exclusion of Weber and Durkheim entirely. Capitalism as a political economic system. Have to understand that to understand anything about the nature of work in our society. Exploitation is a function of capitalism. More on that, okay? Class consciousness, just talked about that. Class conflict. Social change driven by class conflict. Okay? For Weber, one of the things Weber is best known for is the idea that one of the defining features of a capitalist society is the rise of rational, what he called rational legal forms of organization, what we now call bureaucracy. I have much more to say about that as well. And on the one hand, he thought bureaucracy was the most productive organizational system ever devised by humans, most efficient, most productive. On the one hand, this is the beauty of sociological theory, but on the other hand, it created an iron cage. What he meant by that is it created forms of organization that deprived people of individualism and creativity and democracy. Highly productive and efficient on the one hand, but it has a dark side, which he called the iron cage. Durkheim wrote a book, Division of Labor. I mean, what could be more relevant to sociology of work than the division of labor? That as societies develop, the division of labor becomes more complex. People specialize in certain kinds of economic activities and occupations and professions. On the one hand, again, this paradox. On the one hand, it makes society more efficient, highly developed. It's a measure of the development of the society, the progress of a society to have a more complex division of labor. On the other hand, Durkheim was a little worried that people doing different kinds of activities in different places would develop different views, different perspectives, sociology of knowledge. And those different perspectives that they develop would lead them perhaps into conflict, and that would create disorder. All right. Oops. There we go. Okay. Well, let's integrate the theorists into a kind of mashup, which is what I like to do, to show students that you don't have to simply choose one theorist over another. You can borrow and take and utilize the concepts that the different theorists have developed and bring them together into a larger form of analysis. So over in the top left, okay, the rise of capitalism. As Marx said, capitalist societies are characterized by rational bureaucratic organizations, economic capitalist organizations, if you like. These are organizations which obviously divide people into classes: owners, managers, workers. And according to Marx, within these organizations, there is inevitably class exploitation. Okay? The exploitation of workers by owners, by necessity, defining characteristic of capitalism. What's the consequence of this? Well, obviously there's going to be inequality. Again, divisions by class, by status. There are going to be divisions of labor. Here we have the Durkheimian concept. And we have, over time, as workers and organizations communicate with each other and realize what's going on and that they're being exploited, not treated fairly, not paid a fair wage, pushed too hard, working conditions unsafe, whatever it happens to be, you develop levels of class consciousness. The Marxian idea. That translates into, as we said before, maybe potential political action. Labor organization, workers joining together to form a union, to engage in political activity. This political activity that they engage in, they may be engaging in opposition to other social classes and political parties. Party organization is something that Weber highlighted. Class, status, and party. Political party as a significant stratification dimension. This could create social disorder. Durkheim didn't like social disorder. He liked solidarity and social order. For Marx, it creates class conflict. For Marx, class conflict is the motor of history. It is the driver of social change. It is the driver of the transformation of the political economic system. So, I'm just giving you what I call a stylized, because there's a lot we can say. It's a very simplified model here. But the idea is, how do we take all of these different concepts and integrate them into a broad narrative and understanding? I show this image to students in the sociology of work class. We talk about the sociological meaning of this image. And I'd like you to just think about that. Obviously, there is a lot of symbolism in this image in terms of where the workers are standing, how the workers are together, what kind of workers they are in the background. Notice they're holding a pitchfork. Pitchfork. And then a fist emerges. Okay. One could write an essay just on this image, what it represents, what it means sociologically. So that's something you can simply ask yourself. How could I explain this in broad sociological terms, which you will be able to do by the time you complete this class. All right, a few other terms, concepts that we will discuss. Durkheim talked about the non-contractual basis of economic transactions. Now, when you are hired for a job, there is a labor contract, presumably, and there are, again, formal written requirements of the job as part of the contract. Durkheim always emphasized what he called the non-contractual elements of human life. And that is, it doesn't work just because there's a formal contract. There has to be trust. There has to be some level of reciprocity. There has to be some sense of obligation. These are not written down in a contract, but they are vital, vital features of any kind of successful relationship that involves accomplishing goals. Anomie, some of you may be familiar with that because it's discussed in other classes. That's a concept that comes from Durkheim. I think we can relate anomie to deaths of despair, which we will do. And the idea of anomie is often that people are going through, periods of social change, maybe disorder, maybe disruption in their life, in their daily existence. And they begin to become disoriented, not quite sure how to navigate. Durkheim talked about this as a form of normlessness, right? So anomie is a form of normlessness. Norm meaning, what should I be doing? What's appropriate? Weber not only is known for the bureaucratic form of organization within which most people work, but he also wrote The Protestant Ethic in the Spirit of Capitalism. Okay? And this is important as well. He talked about the Protestant ethic, but today we have something in our society, everyone's familiar, called the work ethic. People need a work ethic. That person is not successful because they lack a sufficient work ethic. Okay? These are ideologies, motivating ideologies. Okay? But they're important. Ideological is as important as material. Okay? Remember, the primacy of production, very material, but there has to be the ideological lubricant that gets people to believe that there is a way they should be engaging, working. Marx, alienation, class consciousness, many more. All right. Neoclassical economics talks about work, but they talk about it in a very asociological, non-sociological way. The assumption is always that humans make free choices all the time, and they can decide, do I want to work and expend labor, my labor power, or do I want to spend time on what they call leisure, which is non-work? And you just make a rational determination based on whatever will maximize your utility. If you've taken an economics class, some of these terminology may be familiar. Right? This is sometimes called Homo economicus. Okay? Rational humans making decisions based on a cost-benefit analysis. It's not the way the world works. People don't make free choices. We will discuss all this. So most of what neoclassical economics does in the realm of understanding work and workers is based on certain kinds of assumptions about humans which are not necessarily realistic. Now, what do humans do? Let's say they decide that they will work instead of leisure. They take their human capital resources. Human capital is a big part of economics, and it's an important concept. And they take that into the labor market, and they freely decide whether to enter into a labor contract with an employer. Again, the notion of free, unconstrained, uncoerced choices that people make. And if you assume the world works like this, then, well, everyone had free choice. You could work here, you could work there, it's up to you, you have nothing to complain about. But that's not the way the world works. So you have to understand the political implications of making these assumptions. The political implications about how you interpret why workers go on strike. Why workers ask for a higher wage. Well, if you don't like the wage there, just leave and, freely. You're free to leave and work for somebody else. Is that really the way it works? Are people really free to just move from one job to another? So we'll make reference to the differences between what I would call the economics, or the neoclassical economic approach, and the sociological approach. But this is asociological. No consideration of ideology, that work ethic ideology, structural forces which shape what opportunities people have, political economic factors, what are the prospects and the potentials at any given time. Labor process approach. This is also sometimes closely connected to the primacy of production. I think it's mentioned as well in the first chapter. And the main point here is that the labor process approach, very common in sociology, heavily influenced by Marxist theory. And it's very much focusing on how human labor, humans, take their mental and physical energies and devote them to activity which produces objects, things they need, things they consume. And the question is, under what conditions do people engage in a human labor process? What is the political economic system? What are the class relations? How have these changed historically? To what extent is there exploitation and domination? And how are work organizations designed to extract as much, to use a Marxist term, surplus value, or just to maximize profit? All right. So I don't necessarily make reference to, okay, this is a primacy of production, this is a labor process. These perspectives inform the way we will approach the understanding of work. A couple other concepts that are very important for Marxist theory, and just generally, in kind of understanding things that happen in society. So use value and exchange value. And these are just some examples. Use value. Something is useful to you as a human being. Okay. That's the value that's derived from something. And exchange value is the value that's derived from exchanging something in a market, in a capitalist market, if you like. Okay? So I give some examples here. There might be some land. Somebody uses it to produce, cultivate some food, which they consume. Okay? The land has use value. To what extent is this transformed into exchange value? Land used for the purpose of growing and harvesting crops, to sell in a market for profit. Think about the differences there. We talk about this a lot in the social and economic change class. Right? In less developed societies, there are people peasants, if you want to call them, rural residents that exist and use land for the purpose of survival, subsistence. They grow food, they consume it. Then somebody comes in, takes over that land, and decides this land has exchange value. Not only is the land valuable, but we can use this to produce goods, not for our own consumption, not because we need them, but because we can sell them in a market for a profit. Use value, exchange value. Here's an example I use with sociology students. They don't always like this example, but it's I think, a good way to think about the difference between use value and exchange value in the sense of one's labor, right? So having a sociology degree, as far as I'm concerned, has enormous use value. If you have a sociology degree, if you develop a sociological perspective, you understand and make sense of the world in ways that you would not have ever been able to make sense of the world before you developed a sociological perspective. And it's useful. It helps you understand and analyze and make sense of what the hell is going on around you and in your own personal experiences. What about the exchange value? Well, this is really what everyone focuses on now when they talk about education. They don't say it's just useful to be able to develop and understand, develop skills that allow you to understand the world. Well, what good is that if you can't use it? I do use it. I use it every day. No. What good is it if it doesn't translate into money? That's exchange value, right? So having a sociology degree, presumably, you have a degree. That's a form of human capital. That's a credential. And you take that credential. Let's think back to the neoclassical. You take that credential out into the labor market. Look, I have this credential. I am worth more than somebody who doesn't have the credential. My point is always that sociology may, in some ways, have more use value than exchange value, because lots of people say, well, with a sociology degree, you can't get a high-paying job. Should the value of an education be based on its exchange value? Think about that. Well, a philosophy degree isn't worth anything. What do you mean it's not worth anything? It has enormous use value. Yeah, but you can't make a lot of money. That's different. That's exchange value. Don't confuse them. All right, the last one is simply somebody lives near a forest, a woods. It's aesthetically beautiful. There's diverse wildlife. There are trails. And it enhances the quality of their life if they use the land in that way, experience it in that way. How does that get transformed into exchange value? And this is not necessarily a good thing, right? Well, the land becomes private property. Somebody decides to own it. Somebody decides to exclude people from it. Somebody invests in it because they're speculating that that property will be worth more at some point. And ultimately, they want to take that property, invest in that property, and sell it and exchange it in a real estate market for money. That's land as exchange value, not land as use value. All right. Just under 1 hour. Sometimes I talk too much. All right. So, I've gone over some basic concepts, some basic ideas. Again, much of what we do throughout the semester as we focus on different topics will be informed by some of the principles and the concepts and the ideas that we have discussed in this first lecture. That's what an introductory lecture should be. There's only one lecture. If this was a course that met on campus, we'd be meeting for 1 hour and 15 minutes on Tuesday, 1 hour and 15 minutes on Thursday. This is the only lecture. If you have questions, comments, objections, reactions to the lecture that you would like to discuss, check in with me. I'll put in the discussion area a place where you can post questions or comments about the lecture. Again, as I said, the lecture today overlaps significantly with the reading. That will not necessarily be the case in future lectures. Okay. It's going to vary depending on what the reading is. There are several readings you will have based on chapters from a book I wrote. There probably will be also some significant overlap. Right? But remember, the reading and writing assignment is based on the reading, not the lecture, the reading. This week, a lot of overlap there, but in other weeks, not so much. Okay, I will sign off, and I hope that you've developed some basic understanding of how we're going to approach the sociology of work, and I will post another lecture next week.